Australia saw armed police flood the streets within hours. Camouflage, long arms, vehicles rammed off the road, suspects face down on the asphalt. But there was one thing Australians didn't hear. A single word. Sorry. And that silence is now louder than any press conference. Because this wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about having all the answers. It wasn't even about whether one action could have stopped what happened in Bondi. It was about whether the Prime Minister could acknowledge pain without defensiveness. And for many Australians watching tonight, especially Jewish Australians, that silence didn't feel neutral. It felt personal. If you're watching this right now, ask yourself something honestly. If your community was grieving, would silence feel like leadership or avoidance? And here's the part most people aren't talking about. The reason Anthony Albanese couldn't say sorry may have nothing to do with policy. It may have everything to do with who he is. Before we go any further, take 1 second and subscribe. Most of you watching aren't subscribed, and that's exactly how important conversations get buried. If this topic matters to you, don't disappear after watching. Now, let's break this down.
Why couldn't the Prime Minister say sorry today?
Sorry is the hardest word to say for Anthony Albanese. He is a very proud and stubborn man. He very rarely admits fault, I'm told, even in private. Journalists say he's so reluctant to concede any error of his own, and I think it diminishes his leadership. He said today he wasn't perfect. Well, he's far from perfect. And if you ask the Jewish community, they'll tell you he's not even close to that. And he should be honest and say he hasn't done everything in his power to stop this. We can't say for certain that any one action would have stopped the event on Sunday, the terror attack on Sunday. But can we say that he did everything in his power to prevent that from happening? No, he did not.
Before we continue, do us a little favour by subscribing to the channel, because over 98% of you watching haven't subscribed. It costs you nothing, not even a penny, to join this channel. Have you subscribed? Thanks so much.
Well, Australians will be shocked to see images like that tonight. Police in camouflage gear with long arms standing over men who are face down on the pavement with their hands tied behind their back. That is an image we're more used to seeing coming out of Gaza, not coming out of Sydney. And police don't take action like that lightly. They clearly rammed that vehicle off the road in order to arrest these men and interdict them, according to Sharry Markson's reporting on the way to Bondi. I think that just shows the heightened environment that we're in and the seriousness with which we all need to take this. Let's hope that Bondi is the last worst ever terror attack in Australia. Let's hope there's never any more, but hope is not enough. We need action to accompany it to make sure there are no more incidents like Bondi.
Anthony Albanese has been in politics a long time, and journalists who've covered him for years tell the same story, quietly, off the record, and sometimes on it. He does not like admitting fault. Not publicly, not privately, not even when the cost of silence is obvious. This isn't gossip, it's a pattern. Colleagues describe him as proud, stubborn, reluctant to concede error even when evidence stacks up. And in normal political times, that trait can be spun as strength, conviction, steadiness, staying the course. But crises have a way of exposing the difference between confidence and inflexibility. Because leadership isn't tested when things are calm. It's tested when people are hurting. And that's why his words this week landed so flat. I'm not perfect. That's not accountability. That's deflection dressed as humility. Nobody asked for perfection. They asked for acknowledgement. And when you refuse even that, people start asking harder questions. If you believe leadership includes owning mistakes, even uncomfortable ones, hit like right now so more people see this conversation. Because this is where the story starts getting uncomfortable. Australians are not used to seeing police in camouflage gear standing over suspects with their hands tied behind their backs. Not in Sydney, not in daylight, not on suburban roads. Those images felt foreign, disorienting, like something pulled from overseas conflict footage. Floodlights bouncing off asphalt, sirens cutting through quiet streets, armed officers surrounding men face down on the pavement. Police don't do that lightly. They rammed a vehicle off the road to stop these men. That alone tells you how seriously authorities viewed the threat. And Australians noticed. Veterans watching at home said the scenes looked like places they served overseas. Parents paused and wondered if it's still safe to take their kids into the city. Workers questioned why they felt more exposed than the people making decisions. So when leadership responds to that level of fear with vague language, people feel the disconnect instantly. Because you can't tell someone everything's under control while they're watching rifles on their street. And that's where trust starts slipping. If those images shocked you too, drop a red circle in the comments so others know they weren't alone. And just when people thought the worst part was over, the narrative shifted again.
Well, given the briefings you've had, given what I've known in the past, I'm not surprised to hear they're from Melbourne. I'm not surprised for us to be talking tonight about this being an Australia-wide issue.
Exactly right. There are radicalised cells of extreme Muslims around our country, but particularly concentrated in our major cities on the eastern seaboard, especially Sydney and Melbourne. And I did see Tony Burke on the 7:30 report the other night talking about Bondi, trying to reassure people by saying we're only dealing with 2 people here. Well, if only we were dealing with only 2 people here. The truth is there are people, a larger number of people that are of concern to our intelligence agencies and police, and are being actively monitored by our intelligence agencies.
Look, the men involved, one's dead and one has been arrested and now charged, so we'll be careful with our language. But it doesn't, early on it looked like it could be a lone wolf attack, albeit with 2 people. Now when you look at the information we have, the presence of the younger alleged killer on ASIO watch list, the significant travel to the southern parts of the Philippines. We both know there's training camps for terrorism.
Yeah.
And obviously now what we've seen play out just a couple of hours ago, this is of a real concern. You talked about radical Muslims a moment ago. Why can you say that word? Why can you say that phrase and the Prime Minister can't and Tony Burke can't?
Honestly, there's no good explanation as to why they're refusing to use language like that or why they're so reticent to use language like that when they're really pushed. Occasionally they might say words like that, but they very quickly follow it up with qualifiers to downplay what they're saying. It's hard to escape the judgment that it's about electoral considerations. I mean, some of the worst behaviour that we've seen is in Tony Burke's electorate. The Al-Madina Dawa Centre, which I've been calling to be shut down for a long time now, which is a corrosive institution that spreads radical Islam, is in Tony Burke's party.
We've seen them and we play them, and the Prime Minister looks like today he's just woken up to hate preachers. But if you watch Sky News, you've been, probably bored with that footage. We've played it so often over the last 2 years. Can they shut it down now? Does he need new legislation?
Well, new legislation might help, but why are they only introducing it now? In fact, not even introducing it, just saying they're going to draft it over summer and it might be ready for Parliament when it returns in February. These organisations didn't become a problem on Sunday. These organisations, including Hizb ut-Tahrir, have been a problem for years and they chose not to address it earlier. So I think they haven't fully utilised all the existing tools that we have. I would like to see what kind of scrutiny these guys could bear if the ATO was sent after them, if the ACNC was sent after them, if AUSTRAC was sent after them, let alone ASIO and the AFP. I doubt they'd stand up to that kind of scrutiny. And frankly, I think much of what they've done since the 7th of October has constituted incitement to violence, which is a crime in this country, and they should have been prosecuted for it.
I'm going to play some comments out of an interview last night. Josh Frydenberg was on the ABC, and there was a reprehensible end to that interview with Sarah Ferguson. Have a listen.
How do we not see this through a political lens? I mean, the case that you're making, a personal case against the Prime Minister.
I'm deeply offended by what you just said. I'm deeply offended. That is an insult. That is an insult to say that there's any political motivation in this.
What's your reaction to that?
In a way, Peter, I'm actually glad that question was asked because of Josh's very powerful answer, which I think really just spoke volumes to his integrity and his leadership. But also because the truth is, the Labor Party is whispering this behind closed doors. They're trying to dismiss criticism by people like Josh by saying it's just political, it's just partisan, not recognising he's one of the most prominent Jews in Australia and a leader of the Jewish community who's long out of Parliament and is doing this from a place of conviction. So I'm glad Josh had the opportunity to say what he said. I think we're all better for having heard that.
It felt like the ABC, though, was doing the tag team with Labor because Josh had spoken so powerfully during the afternoon and had, I think, shamed the Prime Minister into fronting the media today in Canberra. And I felt that the ABC was out there doing the bother-boy bidding of Labor.
Well, as you know, sometimes the ABC does do that. Sometimes. I mean, some of the commentary that Laura Tingle has been running this week really just begs belief.
That religion's got nothing to do with it.
Apparently, people who are motivated by Islamic State, who are Muslim and extremists, allegedly, are not motivated by religion. I mean, that's just beggars belief. It's treating the viewers of the ABC like they're idiots. And frankly, the ABC should
just
do better.
moments ago.
The reassurance came quickly. We're dealing with just 2 individuals. On paper, that sounds calming, contained, manageable. But it didn't match reality. Senator James Paterson didn't hesitate to challenge that framing because intelligence agencies don't operate on comforting soundbites. They operate on risk. And the truth is, authorities have long known there are multiple individuals of concern across the country. Not isolated, not rare, especially concentrated in major cities like Sydney and Melbourne. When leaders downplay that, they aren't protecting social cohesion, they're insulting the public's intelligence. Because Australians could see police operations unfolding in real time. They could see the urgency, the scale. Then came the detail that made people stop scrolling. The younger alleged attacker had reportedly been on an ASIO watch list. Let that sink in. And there was significant travel to the southern Philippines, a region long associated with extremist training camps. That's not speculation, that's context. So when people hear just 2 individuals, the gap between words and reality becomes impossible to ignore. Be honest in the comments. When you first heard only 2 people, did you believe it? And just when the questions got sharper, another silence became impossible to explain. There's one phrase that keeps hovering over this entire debate, and senior leaders refuse to say it: radical Islam. When pressed, they hesitate, they qualify, they immediately soften the language until it loses meaning. Senator Paterson didn't do that. He said Australians can handle the truth, that avoiding clear language doesn't make the problem disappear. And many watching agreed, because refusing to name an ideology doesn't prevent extremism. It just prevents honest discussion. So why the hesitation? The explanation many insiders point to is electoral fear. Some of the most controversial institutions linked to radical preaching sit inside key political electorates, including Tony Burke's. The Al Medina Dawa Centre has been flagged for years. Calls to shut it down didn't start on Sunday. They were ignored long before Bondi. So when leaders suddenly act shocked, people remember, and they ask the obvious question: why now? If clear language matters to you, comment the word clarity below, because without it, everything else is theatre. And the deeper you dig, the worse it looks. One of the most misleading narratives this week is the idea that these problems appeared overnight. They didn't. These organisations didn't suddenly become concerning. They've been flagged for years. Yet action was always postponed. New legislation? Maybe later. Reviews? Coming soon. Drafts over summer, Parliament in February. Always tomorrow, never now. What makes this harder to defend is that existing tools already exist. The ATO, the ACNC, AUSTRAC, the AFP, ASIO. These agencies have real power, and many believe they were never fully unleashed. Some legal experts argue that much of what's occurred since October 7 could qualify as incitement to violence, which is already a crime, meaning prosecution wasn't impossible. It was avoided. And when leaders rely on hope instead of enforcement, hope eventually runs out. If "we'll look into it" sounds tired to you, comment enough right now. Because this is where the emotional temperature changes. When Josh Frydenberg appeared on the ABC, something happened that cut deeper than policy. He was asked whether his criticism of the Prime Minister was politically motivated. His reaction was immediate. He was deeply offended. And for many watching, that response said everything. Because Frydenberg isn't some opposition backbencher chasing headlines. He's a prominent Jewish Australian, a former treasurer, a community leader speaking from fear and conviction. Reducing that to politics felt insulting. And here's what made it worse. Behind closed doors, Labor figures were already whispering the same thing, that criticism wasn't genuine, that it was partisan. That framing does real damage, because it tells grieving communities their fear is just strategy, their pain is just optics. If that question crossed a line for you, say why in the comments. This conversation matters, and it didn't stop there.
As the week unfolded, frustration spilled beyond politics and onto the media. Parts of the ABC were accused of shielding the government, of downplaying ideology entirely. Some commentary suggested religion had nothing to do with extremist motivation at all. For many viewers, that felt absurd. People aren't stupid. They can see patterns. They can connect dots. Treating the audience like they're incapable of basic reasoning only fuels distrust. And that distrust is spreading. Online, Australians said they don't recognise their country anymore. Parents talked about fear, veterans talked about déjà vu, and internationally, the story travelled fast. Australia, once held up as a model of stability, was suddenly being questioned. And through all of it, one thing remained missing: a simple acknowledgement from the top. An apology wouldn't undo what happened. No one serious is claiming that. But symbolism matters, especially in moments of grief. Leadership isn't about never being wrong. It's about recognizing pain without defensiveness. And when Anthony Albanese refused to apologize, it became a lightning rod. Not because Australians expect miracles, but because silence feels like indifference. Jewish Australians aren't asking for guarantees. They're asking whether everything possible was done. And many believe the answer is no. If words matter in leadership, share this video with someone who disagrees. These conversations shouldn't stay in echo chambers. Right now, it feels like two Australias are talking past each other. One wants recognition, the other hides behind process. One asks for accountability, the other promises reviews. And history shows us what happens when warnings are ignored long enough. Australians aren't asking for perfection, they're asking for honesty. So the question isn't complicated. Why is saying sorry so hard? What message does that send to communities already feeling vulnerable? And how many warnings does it take before action replaces reassurance? Now it's your turn. Do you think the Prime Minister should have apologised? Do you believe the government has done everything it could? Tell us what you think. Subscribe if you want more real conversations like this, because moments like this shape a country.